Okay. Thanks, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. Well, it's really exciting to come back after that first panel, which was truly amazing, thought-provoking, a little scary. And so we're with the second panel today, we're really going to bring the optimism, because we're going to be talking about solutions, and we're going to be talking about innovation and how they get implemented to help solve, hopefully, some of these problems that we've identified in the short term and the long term. First, let me just introduce myself. I'm Vicki Worden. I'm the president and CEO of the Green Building Initiative. And our mission, we're an international organization, and we work toward improving the built environment's impact on climate and society. And I'm really excited to be here talking about housing, because our vision of the world is that there are sustainable, healthy, and resilient buildings for everyone. And to do that, we need to be extremely collaborative. And so this is a topic of conversation today that requires all of us to get in a lot of rooms over the next 5 to 10 years to try to solve this problem together. So I'm pleased to be introducing your next two speakers. We're going to be starting with Eric Werling, who is the National Director of the Building America program with the Department of Energy. It's a really well-known program. I'm excited about that talk. And we also have Tyler Pullen, who is the Senior Technical Advisor for UC Berkeley's Terner Center for Housing Innovation. And so we're going to be starting with Eric today, and Eric is a recognized expert in residential energy efficiency, indoor air quality, and building sciences. And since 2011, he has worked with more than 20 Building America partnership teams and 4 DOE national laboratories. And they're working to transform building science and knowledge and those innovations into best practices that can be applied throughout the housing industry. And Eric and the Building America program are currently focused on healthy, efficient home technologies, improving construction productivity, and bringing deep energy retrofits to scale, as well as promoting emerging technologies that can make our homes smarter and more resilient. We were just at the Naval Academy yesterday. I was looking at it and remembering how great it was to be in Annapolis, which I lived in for about 12 years. And that actually is where Eric started his journey. He went to the Naval Academy for his bachelor's degree. He went on to become an E-2C Hawkeye naval flight officer aboard the USS Kitty Hawk and a USS Ranger. So we thank you for your service. Eric also holds 2 master's degrees, one in architectural engineering and an MBA also from Penn State University. And then we have Tyler joining us. Tyler's going to be telling us a little bit about his background and expertise, which covers a number of different areas, including civil and environmental engineering, construction management, energy efficient architectural design and analysis, urban planning, climate change, impact modeling, and housing development and policy. And his research also includes work for both US and internationally, particularly on the topic of industrialized construction and as a means to expanding and improving housing production. So with all of this background and research, he's really hoping to help us figure out how to align policies and industry toward these critical housing needs and supporting not only those housing goals, but also environmental and social goals. And so at Terner, Tyler leads the program design and the impending launch of the Builders Lab program and helps companies pursue innovative and industrialized construction methods and refine and scale up their work, which we're really going to have to do. So I'm excited to hear these presentations, and as with the first panel, we're going to get back together. We're going to have a quick break after our speakers, and then we're going to do Q&A. So we're looking forward to the discussion and to hearing all of your questions. Okay, and we'll welcome Eric.
So about 30 years ago, I entered this particular field. It was after my Navy time. I had 3 little kids, my wife and I had decided that we didn't want me to be at sea for them growing up. So I had to figure out, okay, quick, honey, what am I going to do that's going to, improve our standard of living as a family? And but I knew by the time that I was at 30, I knew by that time in my life that I had to do a job that I thought was meaningful, and that was more important than income. But income is important, so I wanted to do it in a way that was going to help my family to survive and thrive. And so I just, I did a lot of studying when I was in my MBA program and discovered that the energy issues and the climate, et cetera, were such important issues. This was back in the early 90s. From my perspective, that I could throw the next 30 years of my life into this challenge. And I love buildings and architecture, so I found a program at Penn State that allowed me to look at both of those. And we're up and running, right? I hope. So just to finish that story real quick. So I started with a business background, some leadership experience at the Naval Academy, and technical knowledge, but not experience in the building efficiency space. And I knew I wanted to do something to help make our buildings more efficient in my career. And I had those sets of skills, which were kind of odd. Right around the mid to late 90s is when the Energy Star Homes program was started, and I got in on the ground floor of that to help EPA to start that program. And I loved it because it was about how can we help businesses to learn how efficiency is actually something that's marketable. It makes their homes better. It's a quality result. And if you focus on delivering efficiency, you get other benefits too. You get healthy homes. You get improved quality processes in the field. You get resilience, we've learned. I mean, this is many, many years later from when I started, but we get all of these benefits by focusing on how do we improve the energy performance of a building. It's really about the efficiency of the product that's delivered to the owners. So, so I just loved it, poured my life into it for, 10 or so years, and then an opportunity to say, but wait, nobody's buying this because of efficiency. People are buying Energy Star because it makes for better homes, higher quality, and indoor air quality and health were a big sales point. And we didn't have anything in that space. We didn't have anything to describe what's a voluntary standard for building better indoor air quality into your homes. So I asked around and found out that EPA was hiring. At that time, I was a consultant. EPA was hiring somebody in their indoor environments division, and they wanted such a label. So I signed me up, and I started the Indoor Air Plus label in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, and we built it on top of Energy Star. So Sam Rashkin, the guy who started the Energy Star Homes program at EPA, he has become my mentor, my good friend, and he was my client for the first 10 years of my career. And then we became partners when I was the Indoor Air Plus program manager and he was the Energy Star program manager, and we sold our programs together. Then when I got the opportunity to join the Department of Energy, the opportunity presented itself for Sam and I to work together and create a new label that's now called the Zero Energy Ready Homes program. And that combined the Energy Star plus a higher efficiency target plus the indoor air quality requirements in the Indoor Air Plus, and we put all those together. I'm going to tell you a little bit about that program in a minute, but I want to get back to the Affordable Energy Earthshot discussion, if I can get the clicker to work. Darn it. Oh boy. Okay, it's frozen again. And I don't want to push buttons. Okay. Let's just forget the slides, because I don't want to do that. I don't want to go back and forth with the slides. I can tell you what's in our slides. So what I told you about my background gets me to a couple of the most important programs that I've been working on that we can offer assistance in the energy affordability space. The Zero Energy Ready Homes program, I worked up that story. My career got us to the point where we launched this program. Zero Energy Ready Homes was completely voluntary, no incentives, no requirements anywhere to do it. Pretty much just, if you do this and reach a higher level, which is roughly 10 to 15% more efficient than the Energy Star, which is roughly 10 to 15% more efficient than prevailing codes in most places. So we're in the 30 to 50% more efficient than codes at the Zero Energy Ready. That's pretty hard for builders to get there. There's a learning curve cost associated with it. There can be additional premium costs for the equipment and the materials, et cetera. And so it's not a light lift, but it sets the stage for extremely low energy bills for anybody who can, get into these kinds of properties. It also includes indoor air quality health protections to help improve the quality of life for the occupants of those homes. And it turns out that we've got some significant resilience requirements built into the homes program, the Zero Energy Ready Homes program. Now, with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act last August, so just a little over a year ago, August 16th, I can remember that day clearly, we all of a sudden have a $5,000 tax credit per unit that is certified to the Zero Energy Ready Homes program. And that event, that policy event, was something that added to the work that we'd done. We'd gotten about 15,000 certified homes without any help from incentives or codes or anything like that. We'd gotten that many homes in the residential new construction sector to get labeled to Zero Energy Ready. And now that we have a substantial incentive, and it just started January 1st of this year, and it goes for 10 years. Now we have a tremendous policy instrument to amplify that opportunity. And for those of you who probably have stuck in your mind that if you want to get to that level of efficiency, it's prohibitively expensive. Well, the truth is it's not so clear as that. It turns out that we have a very substantial number of partners in the Zero Energy Ready Homes program who are affordable housing advocates and affordable housing producers. Most of the multifamily homes that have been certified to the Zero Energy Ready Homes without the 45L tax credit to date have been in affordable housing areas. We haven't, up until just recently, had a program for manufactured homes, which is, more than half of that sector is also an affordable housing sector. And the manufactured homes pilot, which we just started on January 1st this year, we've already got commitments that will more than triple our total certifications per year to date from manufacturers who have committed to doing the Zero Energy Ready home, because the entry price to that housing stock is low relative to the average house that's sold in the marketplace. And so $5,000 incentive, which is just fixed, that's huge for that sector. So we have a huge opportunity if we can deliver. We can help the manufacturers to do it reliably, meet the quality assurance requirements, et cetera. Then we've got in play what we'll be able to achieve in the next 10 years with this tax credit. It's a combination of just better business plus a huge financial incentive that is bigger relative to the home price by a substantial amount for both manufactured homes and multifamily building properties. So we're sitting on the cusp of a major market transformation in new construction. So that's the most exciting thing in my career that I've encountered. And, I guess you can probably tell from the way I'm presenting this, that it's personal for me. This is what I've been working towards for 30 years. And now all of a sudden we have the opportunity to close the deal. So, but there's another problem, which is not solved by this great opportunity in the new construction space. And that is that in 20 years, the current existing housing stock is still going to be, 75% or so of the total housing stock that's in place then. So if we don't do something about existing homes and the efficiency, then we're not going to meet that goal of decarbonizing the building stock. So we've got to figure out ways, and here's the big, 800-pound gorilla in this challenge, is that unlike in the new construction space where you have the opportunity to optimize the design and minimize the amount of price premium associated with efficiency, you're stuck with what you have in place in the field in an existing house or existing home or existing multifamily property, whatever. And you've got to figure out, well, how do we make it better without, disrupting the lives of the occupants, without exorbitant expenses associated with changes to the existing property that we have to make, et cetera. So those are huge challenges. And that's the focus of that Earth shot that I talked about, that I'm not showing you slides about. So the Earth shot is making affordable housing something that we can drive down the costs. I think we have targeted a 50% reduction in cost based on current technology, state-of-the-art technology regarding how do you retrofit existing buildings to make them more energy efficient, with an average efficiency improvement or an average reduction in energy costs of 20% in the next 10 years. So 50% reduction in the cost of getting the retrofits done. That's big, because that means we have to use new technologies and improved process efficiency, et cetera. Soup to nuts, lots of stuff to do there. On average, the 20% reduction, I think, is actually quite modest. We can do a much better than that in some cases, but those tend to cost a lot of money. So this is a balanced set of targets. And then we're giving ourselves 10 years to do that, so that we have another 10 years after that for, to do the scaling, et cetera. Meantime, and this is where I think I'm going to stop on the energy affordability Earth shot, because it's so brand new. I wasn't involved in creating that. So it's out there. It's an important policy instrument for the department to rely upon to help guide our investments and the priorities, et cetera. Those of you who work in the federal government know how challenging that can be to manage those different priorities, et cetera. But it's there. And it's a policy statement on the Department of Energy that this is an important sector for us to deal with, the affordability of energy in the housing sector. And because it's tied to the climate change goal, it's much bigger than just the technology part of it. It's actually scaling. We're not going to meet either of these goals if we don't figure out how to get most of the homes in the country to reasonably low energy bills, and also decarbonize the electric utility infrastructure. So there's a lot there. There's a whole bunch of programs involved. The three that I'll tell you about, I've already told you about the Zero Energy Ready Homes program with the 45L tax credit. We now have multifamily program coming online, and we have manufactured homes. So I'm not going to talk anymore about new construction. The rest I'm going to talk about are our existing home retrofit initiatives. The first is what I was hired to do in 2011 at the Department of Energy, is to manage the Building America program. And this is a program that's been around since 1994. It's been funding boots on the ground demonstrations that involve people in the industry. We'd started out being new construction. So what we did with Building America is we invested in building science experts to help builders to build homes that with a target of 50% more efficient with no additional costs. That's been a real stubborn goal, but we're right at the 50% right now in terms of what state of the art has come up to. So I think we solved that part. We haven't completely squeezed all the cost premium out of the construction process, but we're making a lot of progress there too. So that's what we started out to do with Building America. We are just about this week to announce a brand new set of Building America teams, 9 of them, and they are focused exclusively on retrofitting at a community scale. So the idea there is, what technologies and technical challenges do we need to solve in partnership with the building scientists who know, how to fix buildings, et cetera, the local community, and an implementer who knows how to do programs, policies. So each of these 9 teams had to have partners involved in each of those areas, and they're going to have funds from the Department of Energy in the neighborhood of $1 to $2 million per team per year to dive into the challenges of improving the existing housing community, the existing housing sector in a community, and do it hand in hand with the community, the utility in some cases, the program implementers, et cetera. So we're just about to announce those teams. We don't have projects lined up yet, so stay tuned for that. There's another program that I'm calling a sister program that's called the Buildings Upgrade Prize. The focus of the Buildings Upgrade Prize is essentially what they came up with this a year before the energy affordability Earthshot was conceived. And the idea was, how can we help communities, especially in disadvantaged communities, to implement programs that will encourage the retrofitting of the existing building stock so we can reduce energy bills and decarbonize that community. And it's basically seed money with a lot of guidance and tools to help all of the communities who applied to navigate the difficult pathway through technologies, the incentive process, the implementation of the programs, et cetera. And we just made announcements recently that 45 communities have been selected for that, and they've started the process of defining their projects. So we've got 45 communities around the country that are Buildings Upgrade Prize awardees. Then we have 9 building science expert teams for Building America, who we're trying hard to do matchmaking between these, so the Building America teams can hopefully help some of the Buildings Upgrade Prize winners. And just acknowledging that these challenges of decarbonization and energy affordability at the community scale are huge, and they require a fair amount of integration. In my career, it's a fairly new thing where we've actually effectively worked across communities and technologies and policy instruments all at the same time. So this is a very substantial integration challenge. How do we get a community and a program person and a building scientist and an engineer? It's hard enough just to get engineers and architects to agree on something. If we can also throw into that the utility and the policymaker for the local community, now the challenge is huge for coordinating goals, and that's what we're trying to do with these programs and with the Earthshot. And then the last thing that's on the table, and I'm not an expert here, but I can talk about it to a reasonable amount, is also in the Inflation Reduction Act were a series of rebates that it's capped in terms of expenses. It's roughly not quite $9 billion of rebates available until they run out, being distributed to the states for the home energy rebates and the home electrification rebates. Both of those have built-in requirements for additional funds associated with disadvantaged community and properties. So I'm not an expert, but as I recall from the slide that I got from my colleague Adam Hodge at the State and Community Energy Program Office, and I can put anybody in touch with him if you'd like. They've got it structured so the states have to do several different things. One, they have to structure them so that at least 50% of the awards, the rebates that they do, are going to income qualified. I think it's 80% of the AMI, and so there's a requirement for them to spend money on affordable projects. The second thing is, what's the second thing? I don't remember. This is where having that slide available would be nice, but the slide's available for everybody. Can I use it now? Yeah, let me get to the end of the presentation. Here we go. Here's some of the facts. So 50% is the minimum rebate allocation associated with homes that are in the low income category, divided with at least 10%. Let's see. At least 10% of that has to be multifamily. And then back to the points I was trying to make before. Oh, the community benefits plan. Each of the states have to have a community benefits plan built into their allocation. And then there's also a provision for development of tools that help people access this, particularly, and the last bullet is about the opportunity to braid the incentive. So for instance, many of these rebates and incentives can be additive. I'm less familiar with how the rebates can be additive with other like local and local state utility incentives, et cetera. But in many cases, they can be used to fund a very substantial portion of the upgrades. There is also some of that braiding that can happen in the tax credit space. So for instance, in the new construction program with the 45L tax credits at $5,000 per unit, they can also be used in conjunction with the low income housing tax credits. And together, those can be a very significant incentive available. So that's my last slide. And thank you for putting up with my technology challenges and letting me ad lib my presentation. I think I covered everything that I put in the slides anyway, and the slides are available for folks to look at. So I think it's Tyler's turn.
I hope to never subject an audience to my own ad-libbing, so I'm really hopeful that the slides work out at this stage for my side of things. I can also briefly ad-lib about why I have so many buzzwords in my career path. Some combination of enthusiasm and curiosity and a heavy dose of existential angst. But nonetheless, a real honor to be here. I think as a reflection of a lot of the value of these events being talking to each other, I'll try to keep this brief. But also, I think I'm the first presentation so far to not have charts, which is a personal win for me. So my attempt will be to sort of reframe some of the conversation, especially around the word innovation. I think I've mostly included innovation in quotation marks here. The first reframing is in the title. I think best practices implies a level of expertise that we don't necessarily have. I think probably good practices is a better word. And emphasizing the word practices here, I think a lot of the concept of innovation that I care about most is not just about getting better, but it's about the process of getting better at getting better, if we don't want to get too meta. But to start off, some distinction of why there are two Terners up here, neither of which are Terner Construction, which we often get confused with a lot in the building trades world. So Terner Center is officially a part of UC Berkeley, and that's where we publish a lot of our research, broadly addressing housing policy and market actions, and having a growing body of research as of recently into climate and that overlap with housing, which we're pretty excited about. On the flip side, Terner Housing Innovation Labs is a nonprofit spinoff we made to do a lot more agile and active programming in the housing space, directly informed by a lot of the research that comes out of the Terner Center. And so the key distinction for anyone who knows about the word bureaucracy is UC Berkeley here. And so these are really complementary scopes. I straddle both lines, as I'll talk about later on in the presentation. But the most important thing is that we both have the word innovation in our names, which means we are the most qualified people to be speaking on this panel, obviously. There's the beautiful formatting I had hoped to see. So pretending that there isn't strike through in the buzz, I think it's helpful for me in addressing what comes to mind when I hear the word innovation. And it tends to be framed as a lot of can blank solve the housing crisis, especially as I get contacted by news media outlets frequently around modular construction or 3D printing. And make no mistake, as other panelists have already discussed, technology is a key part of the puzzle, very much one piece of the silver buckshot that Chris loves to talk about, and which I absolutely plagiarize as a good helpful phrase here. But I think this tends to take a lot of the spotlight of what innovation is or can be. And so most of my presentation, I want to focus on sort of the less glamorous procedural innovations that are fairly low tech and very high human, but nonetheless, I think can have a really dramatic impact on the affordability and other outcomes that we care about. And so the basis of this is that certainly technology and new delivery models and a bunch of other exciting buzzwords can be a part of this puzzle, but affordability outcomes in particular don't necessarily require these brand new shiny things. And yes, this will be a continued belabored metaphor throughout the presentation, to be clear. The phrase I'm going to use to refer to some of these less glamorous innovations are the real B's of the work. The ground level innovations in how we connect to each other and work towards common goals that I think is nonetheless really worth glorifying and elevating here. And so at the abstract level, some really uninteresting things like design. It was briefly mentioned by Rob earlier. I think we underestimate how just designing efficiently, building smaller, is probably one of the most direct correlates with both affordability and energy efficiency of new units and old units alike. I think there's many low-key ways to do this, including wild innovations like pocket doors, where you don't need the space for a swinging door, or other interventions that also depend on project type, like designing for shared living spaces. Not necessarily single room occupancy, but I myself, along with many in my generation, are in co-living experiences. And we're living in a lot of units that could be given to families and are much more, I think, a higher need in that demographic, as a lot of the new units coming online are studios and one bedrooms. But I think there could be more opportunities for designing for co-living and achieving affordability through that basic reframing of a project type in this conversation. And another really underemphasized one is just sticking to a design. There are plenty of reasons that from concept through construction, design changes, and change orders have a direct impact for the cost of construction and development. Many different actors contribute to these change orders, and by no means is it a perfect system to have more informed design from the get-go. But I think as much as every actor can contribute to reducing the amount of change in the design over time, the more naturally easy it is to achieve affordability outcomes by reducing cost of development and generally improving the collaboration between team members throughout the development process. The most exciting topic I have to talk about, and I'm pretty sure this is also my only all text slide, but contracts. Who doesn't get amped up to talk about contracts? I think design, bid, build is still one of the most dominant contract ways to deliver housing. I don't think any of us who've been in the industry need examples of why design, bid, build has sometimes misaligned incentives and oftentimes pretty poor project performance on cost and timelines. There are different contract methods that exist, especially for projects that are publicly funded that have rigid criteria around how a project must be bid competitively. Just one of the ones I'll toss forward, which itself is a broad bucket, integrated project delivery. The main premise behind this is having a shared risk or incentive pool for all of the actors on a project team. This usually amounts to some additional amount of funds beyond the estimated cost of construction that all of the project team members architect, general contractor, major subs have access to, and if the cost has overrun that is directly carved out from that shared profit pool. And so it's not perfect, but project performance can improve when everyone's incentives are aligned. And when you know a part of your additional profit on a project depend on working together with other project team members, that too can dramatically improve certainty and the cost effectiveness of the delivery of housing. I still do the thing where I forget to gulp, so this is helpful for me. Not going to go into too much detail, though this is just as exciting as contracts. We've already referenced building codes as a major leverage point. I think the fact that we have 19,000 plus jurisdictions in the US and therefore 19,000 plus different building codes with slight adjustments across jurisdictions, it should not be surprising at all that innovation is difficult in this regulatory environment. And somewhat similarly, and I have a feeling Ivan might mention this later, there's a prescriptive building code that is our baseline default in the US, and it is inherently listing out the finite number of ways that we expect to reach our building safety and quality goals. There is another means of doing this called performance code that sets the goals, the performance goals of resisting earthquake damage or flood resilience at the outset, and leaving open the means and methods and design that a project team can use to meet those high-level goals. It is automatically unlocking a level of innovation that prescriptive codes tend to limit by default. And so highlight those two as pieces of our building code that are not necessarily easy to shift, but that would immediately change the calculus on how much innovation is unlocked. And I'm really glad retrofits have already been brought up, because I really expected this bullet point to be like, don't forget about retrofits. But nonetheless, I think the fact of the capital P preservation of the existing housing stock, affordable and otherwise, cannot be left out of any conversation of affordability. And by default, they tend to be cheaper on a per unit basis than new construction. Both are very much needed. There are 3 Ps after all, but never forget retrofit as part of the very low tech means of achieving affordability relevant across the country, and only more so over time. Some of the work Terner Labs is doing, that's the nonprofit side. We run an incubator program. This is sort of our flagship program. It's a few years old now and been fairly successful. Basically, we incubate small cohorts of 5 to 6 companies, offer them targeted mentorship and relationship building opportunities using the conveniently overlapping branding of Terner Center and Terner Labs in tandem, and really try to find companies doing interesting things, not necessarily the most buzzwordy things, to achieve affordability, climate, and equity goals across the nation. And so just a very small selection of some of the companies that I think symbolize what I'm trying to demonstrate here. Parity out of Baltimore is one that uses the crazy innovative concept of bulk purchasing. They essentially buy or acquire full lots of abandoned or dilapidated properties in their home in Baltimore, achieve an economy of scale by retrofitting them to be new housing, and then disseminate these units, selling them to local organizations to be offered at affordable income levels to historically Black communities in particular in Baltimore. Super low tech, super high impact. The Guild is another company we have had in the Housing Lab based in Atlanta. They actually symbolize exactly what Solomon mentioned in the community land trust space. So by separating out the value and appreciation from the structure and the land underneath, the land trust is able to use the appreciation of the land value to proliferate more housing opportunities around their home in Atlanta, which the Guild facilitates, while the homeowners and even other community members who are not living in community land trust homes are able, are able to take some of the appreciated value from the structures on top. And so this is a very low tech way. It's different enough to still have different pros and cons compared to traditional development models for affordable housing. But nonetheless, they've done a lot of great work in Atlanta and are hoping to expand their model elsewhere and within their own community. And then lastly, I'll just mention Frolic Communities based in Seattle. They too demonstrate exactly some of the things the earlier panel mentioned. So I swear we didn't coordinate. We're just, we share a brain trust. They basically use single family properties that have had their zoning capacity unlocked by recent legislation in Seattle to co-develop those single family properties with the existing homeowners, allow them to accrue some equity while dramatically expanding the rental housing capacity of those lots. And so it incentivizes single family homeowners to participate in sort of the upzoning and increasing of sustainable density in their neighborhoods. Excited to mention that the Builders Lab, which was briefly mentioned in my bio, is going to be launching next year. And this is sort of one of my children that I'm happy to steward into this earth, where there are no human ones to speak of. This is basically running in parallel to our housing lab, but a lot more focused on some of the innovative and industrialized construction interventions. This doesn't necessarily mean they're the high-tech companies or products or automative tools that are within the space of industrialized construction. Some of these innovations are simply in the business model of using offsite or other innovative means to reduce the cost of construction and improve the climate-related performance of new housing. And so this will follow a similar model to the housing lab. For the first year especially, we'll be offering the programming virtually to a small cohort of companies across the US. The coaching and mentorship we plan to offer will be more targeted to this technical space, thanks to some close co-conspirators in civil engineering program at UC Berkeley. Another component of this, which Ivan will definitely share because I had the privilege of joining some international study tours to see what a mature industrialized or innovation market looks like in the housing industry abroad. For our program, it's really important for a small cohort of new and growing companies to learn about what innovation looks like elsewhere, partially to just develop a shared vernacular of how to make innovation integrate with existing housing market. Ours is a particularly stubborn one, but also to show them sort of the breadth and depth of what an ecosystem of innovation around housing looks like, especially as more countries or other countries have been fairly successful in integrating more sustainability goals, as Eric mentioned, towards their innovation system. And then in 2025, we plan to expand the Builders Lab programming in its second year to a physical anchor site. Part of this is to prioritize the actual physical innovations, I might even use the word technology, to basically allow access to a shared space for prototyping, testing, iterating on batch assembly processes. One of the challenges to offsite construction is that you need tens of millions of dollars of investment to have your own factory. And as soon as you get that investment, you're expected to be producing at maximum output almost immediately to meet your investors' needs. So you may not know what factory you're moving into, and we're supposed to have a product that we know can be output at X amount of units per year. So part of this is to de-risk that process. Another huge piece of this, and why a physical anchor site is important for it, is it creates a sort of single source of truth, is what we're hoping, to basically have a convening space for not only companies that we select into the Builders Lab, having been vetted by our technical consultants, myself included, but also then trained within our program to be able to make sure their business model scales and that they're aligning with some of the values that we hope to incubate in the housing industry at large, including sustainability and equity goals. And so part of this is sort of outward facing, creating a sort of clearinghouse of business models and technology that has been vetted to some degree and which we think has strong potential to actually make some of the more transformative changes to the building industry writ large. And again, we're learning from models abroad. The picture on the bottom here is a stacked modular unit out of a facility in the United Kingdom, which, speaking of forced acronyms, it's called BEST. I think Better Environment, Smart Transformation. Built Environment, Smart Transformation. BEST is the important one, important piece of that. But they are doing a lot of the same programming I just described in their physical facility in Scotland. And so thankfully, they're very friendly and willing to share information with us because we're designing a somewhat equivalent and slightly expanded version in the US. And there can be more than one in the US also, to be clear. To provide slightly more specific examples beyond our programming and some business models, I'm deeming this the honey, that sweet, sweet output that we want from these low-tech innovations that I want to just emphasize can produce very measurable, tangible outcomes for affordability. So the first project I'll mention is one we got to do a case study on. This is a permanent supportive housing project in San Francisco. So capital A, affordable. I believe it was 5/2, 5 stories of residential over 2 stories of commercial. The 3 interventions, which it is crucial that they are 3, not 3 specifically, but it's crucial that they don't stand on their own as having achieved some outcomes. There's a state policy that allowed streamlined permitting for affordable housing built near transit, which this project was. There was help and support from a local nonprofit and the city of San Francisco. Basically, the city of San Francisco had public subsidy that the project was eligible for, but the timelines didn't align with the development cycle. And so a nonprofit stepped in, put their money temporarily at risk to move the project forward before the public subsidy came in to replace that nonprofit capital. And part of the motivation for moving the project forward as soon as they could was that it was also using modular construction. And this wasn't a plug and play. They just happened to be able to use the offsite capacity of a nearby facility. It was designed for modular from the start. And that is a crucial element. Ivan will almost definitely emphasize that modular construction or industrialized construction generally isn't a simple plug and play. It's a fundamentally different way of designing and delivering a project, or it could be. And so with these somewhat low-tech innovations, the project saw 30% time savings and 25% cost savings compared to similar nearby projects in San Francisco. And that is, no one of these 3 interventions shares the lion's portion of that outcome. I think they were somewhat small on their own, but together we're able to combine to achieve these things. And so coordination, I guess, is the broadly defined innovation that I'm really emphasizing here. And then a same but different project in the outskirts of Sacramento. My examples are from California because we do everything right all the time, obviously, and we've solved our housing crisis ages ago. No, it's a place as desperate for innovation as anywhere else, but also very unique. But nonetheless, I think this project in particular holds a few lessons that are very relevant elsewhere. And so this is a 44-unit development, much smaller. These are single family homes, but all of them are offered at either 80% or 30% AMI. So they too are capital A affordable in that they're deed restricted, but not in that they used public subsidy. In particularly, they avoided using LIHTC due to the competitiveness of LIHTC credits. That's redundant. Competitive compared to LIHTC funds, but also because the timeline of LIHTC applications and funding drawdown did not match their development timeline. So their interventions were taking advantage of a state policy that functionally upzoned California by streamlining the process of splitting single family lots and allowed an ADU on every single family lot in the state. So these were only 11 sites that the developer purchased, but it's outputting 44 units all at affordable levels, which was crucial for the project to pencil out the way it did. Similarly, but slightly differently, they had close relationships with the local county government, as well as a nearby nonprofit they've worked with in the past that offered low-cost construction loans, which were crucial for them, again, helping them avoid LIHTC funds. And then lastly, these are HUD code homes. So they're built to that federal manufactured home code that preempts local zoning code, which immediately makes it more difficult to do cross-jurisdictional work. So they took advantage of the massive untapped capacity of manufactured home builders around the state, which have dispersed capacity to build homes around the country, and combined them with some of these policy and financing innovations, if you want to call them that, to achieve these outcomes, which were more than 50% time savings compared to traditional development of this size in Sacramento. This is with a slight caveat of this is their own analysis. We didn't do a case study on this, but I trust them pretty fully, given how they've told me about the project. The cost savings, they didn't compare it to a similar project nearby because there weren't many, but the construction costs came at, I think, about $350,000 per unit in total development, I should say, which is, I think, less than half of the cost of multifamily development in the same region for projects built recently. And so, sure, single family construction is cheaper than multifamily by default, but in particular, to get such a fairly dense 44-unit community built, which is honestly matching the density of some nearby multifamily projects for half the development cost, is pretty substantial. And then they're very much intending to replicate this model with the 3 interventions and some improvements over time. And so I have a feeling they will only get better outcomes in future projects. So to very much echo a point that Rob made a few times, we kind of need to solve all the problems to solve any of the problems. innovation itself is not addressing many of the long-standing and continued issues of the housing industry, which the same reason we're in this mess in the first place are the same reasons that innovation is difficult in housing. And so just to put them somewhere, some of these things include the baseline uncertainty and unpredictability of housing development writ large, from entitlement and permit processes to design inconsistencies across jurisdictions. There are examples of building codes that contradict themselves in some jurisdictions. All of these things make housing difficult. Turns out they also make innovation difficult. General familiarity and experience with anything that might be innovative, including things like the contract reconfigurations I mentioned, are just unfamiliar enough where basically every stakeholder is resistant to change, even when they do want to or are aware of the benefits of changing their delivery models. And then very related to that, the industry fragmentation at almost every level. Within a project, there are misaligned incentives for collaboration. Sector-wide, our industry associations are a little bit siloed, and I think there's plenty of opportunity for stronger overlap there. But even in how we are trained fundamentally, I think there's a reason I'm up here. I think it's partially because I consider myself a professional amateur. It's mostly the fact that I have had experience in like 7 to 8 different segments of our industry, which offers some basic perspective that shows a lot of opportunity for collaboration, which is arguably one of our first innovations ever. And so I don't think there's anything wrong with expertise, certainly, but I think there's way more opportunities and areas for growth sideways across disciplines on the project level and on the sector level that are desperately or creating a desperate friction with anything truly innovative. And then be remiss if we don't really, really emphasize the fact that every level of the building industry has never been inclusive. I think the speakers today somewhat reflect that reality, but the building trades on site to the folks in the office do not reflect the general population that we claim to be serving. And so this has tangible economic realities that Rob went into a little bit. There are worker shortages because we're only recruiting males for the most part, and also an aging workforce that desperately need to be replaced and grown if we are to meet any housing goals, retrofit, new construction, or otherwise. But also, I think any innovation should also depend on and accelerate progress towards inclusion in the workforce. We have proven we can't do this with the existing workforce. And not only do new ideas invite new people, but new people bring new ideas. And so in terms of getting better at getting better, I think there is no way we really introduce innovation into the industry without dramatically changing who is in the industry. And then lastly, and somewhat related to the sort of friction and exclusion in the workforce, we have a generally high barrier to risk assessment in the housing industry. There are good reasons for this. We are building basically permanent things, or we're building things that are permanently attached to the ground and asking people to live in them for 50 to 100 or more years and feel safe in them. Of course, we should have a very high bar for the quality and safety and health of our housing. However, I think there is a way to do that without also being immediately dismissive of doing things differently. This is true on insurance or risk assessments for investments or policy goals. I think there's a better balance to be had than what we are currently doing in terms of perceiving and assessing risk as an industry. Of course, we're researching all of these things, so I assume within 1 to 2 years we'll perfectly solve all of the problems. No, but I assume many of the faces in this audience and in Zoom and the organizations here are can probably add their logos and faces to this list as well, which I think is absolutely required if we are to address any of these in a meaningful way. And then I wouldn't be an academic without ending with questions, because that's all I have. I think the fundamental one, which is arguably the reason this event exists, but nonetheless we'll put it into words, is what are our best leverage points to address some of those longstanding issues for many of the goals we have for housing. And the couple that I'll just highlight that don't always make it into the conversation. Everyone talks about government involvement, state, local, federal. Obviously, there are many ongoing opportunities for them to intervene and improve the housing industry writ large. I think regional government is one that tends to be lost. Coming from the San Francisco Bay Area, which is treated as a single regional entity. Certainly, we are suffering the housing crisis in a very connected way. We are technically 9 different counties, 109 jurisdictions with 109 individual city councils, and 24 public transit agencies, all governed separately. We have a regional government technically, but they have never really been given legislative power or financing power to influence the housing market of the Bay Area as a single unit. And so that is certainly part of the reason we are the worst case scenario of a housing crisis. But I think in general and across the US, there's much more opportunity for right sizing the scale of regional government that can be used to address housing markets at the scale of the issue, which is regional. Another one, which I briefly mentioned, industry associations. I think they exist. They're somewhat siloed by default for good reason, but I think there's massive opportunities for them to leverage their extremely high membership, their representativeness of industry interests by discipline, but even something as basic as like extending the continued education credits for someone attending another industry-related conference would be a wild idea that I have that is maybe impractical, but nonetheless that I think would improve sort of the collaborative tendencies of our industry at large. And then universities, I think in many cases, universities are drivers of innovation in some ways. They're also regularly accused, pretty fairly, as writing things for academics and not relating directly to industry or market actors on the most pressing issues that we are all facing. I think another component that tends to get ignored is, fun fact, universities are training the industry groups that we claim to be fragmented. I think a really interesting thing that I don't know about is like the accreditation process for architecture programs, engineering programs, construction management programs have fairly rigidly defined criteria for what makes a program eligible, what is the right training for each of those segments. I'm fairly confident they do not have any encouragement or requirements for cross-disciplinary interaction. And I think it's a real shame for all the expense that I and others have paid for a college education to come out with a nice degree in a specific discipline and not have any idea how the other disciplines work. And then fundamentally, of course, cross-cutting all of these things is how do we change culture? I don't pretend to have any idea, but at the very least, I expect talking to others being a critical part of it, which is why I conveniently finally call back to this awful metaphor I've created, which is cross-pollination. Obviously, it's relevant for today's discussions on and off the stage, but more generally, I think basic mechanisms of making sure we are collaborating across industries, even within a project, are really crucial for driving the innovation that we purport to want. So thank you. Feel free, of course, to follow both Terners for research and ongoing activities, but looking forward to this and other conversations.
Thank you to both our speakers. We're going to take a 5-minute break. We talked about innovation. We talked about a lot of different technologies that are out there and a lot of systemic issues that are out there. And we talked about some process solutions. So one of the things that came to me that I wanted to see if I could focus on first is modular. What is the vision of modular? Like if we were to go into each community, and we know we have those building code conflict issues, and we know we have process issues in design, but if we were to give them a vision for what modular looks like in 5 to 10 to 15 years, what would that look like?
Tyler, you get to go first on that one.
I'll get to go first and nervously look towards Ivan, who may confirm or deny any of my predictions. No, I think the easiest place to start looking towards a question like that is at some of the more advanced, further along, mature, industrialized construction sectors abroad. So tends to be brought up Scandinavia, especially Sweden. United Kingdom is a bit further ahead than us, and Japan is also really leading the charge, kind of calmly in terms of how established they are. They don't see industrialized construction as innovation a lot of the time. It's just a component of their building industry. And so I think that's the piece I would look at. There are questions of market share, and they vary from 15 to 30% in some of these mature markets of new construction for both single and multifamily. I don't pretend to know what is the appropriate percentage share. I think the bigger thing I would emphasize is the fact that industrialized construction, and I should say modular construction is like building three-dimensional boxes, a subcomponent of my intentionally vague industrialized construction banner. I think the point of it is to kind of raise the floor on a lot of the performance metrics we use to describe the building industry. So many of these conversations often start with staggered productivity growth or stagnancy, with lack of equity in workforce, or lack of equity and inclusion in the workforce, with raising sustainability standards. I think the industrialized construction methodology can be a vehicle for a lot of these broader goals, but also to improve the comparison points of typical stick-built or on-site construction as well. So it's not a fully dividable pie where they operate independently, but it is showing that there are new approaches towards building that can sort of raise the standard across the board, no matter how we are building approach-wise.
And just a little part B to that question, is there an anchor location where the manufacturing is happening in every congressional district? Is there one, are there 2 or 3 in every state? Like, what does that look like on a regional basis to help solve trucking issues and those other complexities?
A good question. I think it's safe to say there are many different sort of small hubs. I think Pennsylvania comes to mind as a fairly huge hub of manufacturing capacity. A lot of that is built off of their manufactured home building capacity, which is same but different to more broadly defined modular construction. I think I would be comfortable at least in saying there is within a 500-mile radius of any place you can think of some manufacturing capacity. There are many caveats to that statement, including counting manufactured home builders as part of this equation. But also a part of this is that's where we can't lend a ton of experience or insight from other countries, because we are the size of 10 to 20 other countries, and arguably we are 50 different countries. And so what a mature sector in the US looks like geographically is a very open question that I don't pretend to have answers to.
Can I tackle the modular issue? I don't disagree with anything that Tyler said. I just want to sort of bring it down to a level of what I've learned observing this industrialized construction space, and that's a term that maybe not everybody's comfortable with. I love the term because it's basically saying, can we industrialize construction rather than building with sticks in the field, which is the way that buildings have been done for eons, right? And the theory is wonderful, and I still love the idea that by producing most of the building inside a factory where there's you've controlled the environment, now you're not raining on the site, etc. You have employees who are used to coming to the job and doing a specific task repeatedly over and over and over again in a set environment. The theory is wonderful with regards to industrialized construction, that if we can increase the productivity of that process, we can squeeze a lot of the waste out of the process. So that's the theory. What's actually happened in real life, though, is that there's several other things that make it harder for people to actually be profitable in doing modular. One of the speakers on the earlier panel spoke to this issue, that the site-built codes are still what the modular manufacturers have to build to, and there's so many of them then they can't actually mass produce the same processes because the requirements change. So that's one issue. It's probably the biggest. The other thing is that it's more expensive to ship air. This is the term of the trade, than it is to ship raw materials. So the modular and the manufactured home industry have to spend more money on transportation than the stick frame construction industry. And when we get to the point where we've saved more money in the production process in the factory, then the incremental increase in cost to ship the boxes to the site and to crane them on and put them together in the setup crews and all that sort of stuff, then we're at a point where we can actually start to more than just break even and compete in the stick frame market, but actually exceed and reduce the cost. And they've done that in Sweden and and Japan, and they've blown away our but they have, those two countries, notice, are much smaller
Yeah.
than we are here. So,
Yeah.
so there's some fundamental challenges about modular and manufactured housing that remain difficult challenges in order to reap that reward of increased productivity in the factory.
So maybe a little bit more vision sharing will help.
Yeah.
We can capture your vision.
I'm still optimistic that
Yeah.
we can increase productivity continually
Good.
to the point where doing more in the factory is actually beneficial. And the history of the industry has been that way. I mean, think about things that we build in the factory now without thinking about it, like trusses and
Mhm. Right.
windows and doors and other components. We just haven't gone all the way to the point where we can squeeze those costs out of the system.
Yeah. That's
Just
great point.
briefly highlight too, is a lot of the first ideas that you have to incorporate as a project team to do modular or other industrialized assembly methods well is basic stuff that serves any type of construction, like having a design informed by the assembly process. It's an easier conversation to negotiate when you can see a factory and an assembly line, but designing for repeatability and having a standardized means of connecting the parts of construction or having similar layouts from floor to floor. On-site trades benefit from that too, even in the most basic version of construction that we describe as traditional, conventional, stick-built. And so the basic premise serves industrialized construction, but it also can better serve the building industry writ large, which is my whole pitch on low-tech innovation.
It's great. Well, what you're doing there at Berkeley is pretty impressive. So that's great. Well, so let's talk about decarbonization. And Eric, you and I talked for 2 seconds beforehand, and we were talking about the tipping point that we feel like we're at right now in the economy. So we have a huge amount of focus from investors, focused by regulatory, focused by policy on decarbonization. How do we get it down to the home builder and get over some of their barriers? I know we talked about the cost incentives and
Right.
credits that are in place, but how do we get them past some of their concerns about those costs?
Yeah, that's I mean, that's been much of my focus for the last 30 years. And the good news, I think, is, and I mentioned this in my talk, is that we're at a point where we have more incentives available than ever before. We've got more proven results by builders who did it just because it could help differentiate their products, et cetera. And the good news is that all of the major builders, so the large companies, public builders that are they've got home building down to a business, and they're all looking at these incentives thinking, well, we've been watching these efficiency requirements creep up all around us and seeing whether or not we could compete by being more efficient, et cetera. But now they're all figuring out, okay, these incentives are in place for the next 10 years. And it's not a question of whether we're going to get more efficient and build in the decarbonization goals that are needed for their industry. It's a question of when and how to do that while minimizing their business risk, et cetera. And another factor is that corporations, now they're not the only builders who pay attention, but the corporations, all, and many small ones as well, all have to pay attention to their sort of environmental footprint with ESG reporting and sustainability reporting being an important part of business, especially the larger builders. They all have to figure out how they're going to please their stakeholders and shareholders in particular in this case, and being able to meet these above code standards and count all of the emissions reductions and all the efficiency improvements and et cetera, carbon reductions will be added to that metric. Once they can count that, then it becomes, okay, we need to do this. Now we need to figure out how to minimize the cost of getting to that point. So I'm really optimistic in the new construction sector. I'm focusing a lot of attention these days on retrofits, and I'm not as optimistic, but I'm hopeful because the challenges are bigger. The costs differentials are larger. So we're having to scratch our heads on the retrofit challenges. But the good news again is that there's lots of examples. If you look hard, you can find examples all over the country
Yeah.
of organizations that have figured out how to improve buildings to radically reduce their environmental footprint. And again, I think it's just a matter of how long will it take us to get there.
It makes a difference when it feels like everybody is working toward the
That's
same thing at the same
absolutely
time,
right.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, it's a unique time in our economy. And how about you?
I think that was a great coverage. I'd emphasize just the basic premise of building smaller. Again, correlates with more affordability and energy efficiency targets on a per unit basis than almost any singular intervention. And so finding ways to encourage us to build and design more efficiently units that are just frankly smaller floor area, and acknowledging that I'm glad you highlighted it, that affordability and energy efficiency are not usually, honestly, in conflict. I think a lot of basic quality of life features and certainly quality of construction features also service energy efficiency. Building to a higher standard, including tighter control on seals, around windows, walls, all of the above, have windfall benefits for basic thermal comfort, which also happens to correlate with reduction of energy use. And so in many ways, the things we tend to hold on high of building quality are also serving energy efficiency in a way that absolutely should be of interest to mass builders for their baseline.
So Tyler just mentioned something that I think is super important, and you talked about it as building size. I'm afraid that a lot of people think of when we talk about building size as being, the fad of, ADUs and tiny houses and that sort of thing. But I want to highlight an example. There's a company called Walsh Construction out in the Pacific Northwest who took a project, this is about 5 years ago, it was a multifamily project, and they wanted to make it passive house, and they wanted to do it. So passive house is the most aggressive energy efficiency standard we have in North America, even more so than my Zero Energy Ready Homes program. And they wanted to do it without having an increase in cost for the design and construction of the buildings. And they did it, and they did it by mostly, most of the savings they got were by looking at their designs and figuring out how much wasted space do we have in this design. So they streamlined some of the corridor designs, some of the entry points, et cetera. They came up with, and they decided instead of 9-foot ceilings, we can live with 8-foot or whatever. And they ended up getting to that passive house level without any additional cost at all. So it's a point where sometimes just doing a better design can actually get you to that. And it was less space, total, but a modestly less space and better efficient design of the movement in the space. So people didn't experience it as being any smaller.
Yeah. So getting some of those case studies out and showing the leaders in the market will help. And we have questions on both sides, so we'll go over here first.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm actually visiting from Texas, so I definitely understand the higher energy bills. So, I'm thinking about single family home ownership. We're seeing a lot of people relocating into areas due to affordability, and they're relocating into areas that have higher exposure to climate related events or extreme heat, extreme cold. And as we're thinking about retrofitting existing housing stock, I wanted to hear from the panel what your thoughts are about what happens in the future if some of our minority segments are not able to get in and retrofit this housing stock. Could this be the source of a new equity boom or an equity bust for our homeowners that don't take part in retrofitting their homes?
Great question.
A very big question.
Yeah, it's a very big question.
I think almost every decision we make could be an equity boom or bust. So there's certainly definitely going to point to the probably good practices. But we're experiencing this in real time in California too, even without the retrofit piece with wildfire risk. And so some attempts at curbing the wildfire risk of new construction, especially as we've inevitably had sprawling development because of our own affordability issues, the intuitive sort of market incentive would be either to dramatically raise insurance in those extended areas, which sometimes happens, or put a hard coded limit called urban growth boundaries, basically saying we will not encroach upon rural or undeveloped land beyond this limit. A generally probably maybe good idea in the sense of reducing wildfire risk, but it was not accompanied with any respective increase or unlocking of the housing capacity in the urban growth boundary. And so it's just further exacerbated a lot of affordability issues within the metropolitan cores that are the causes of the continued sprawling development. And so even within governmental policies and across governments, obviously there can still be wildly siloed decision-making and a lack of complementary action, where I'm probably in support of an urban growth boundary sort of approach, or something layered with an urban growth boundary approach and a paired retrofit incentive or rebate program for folks who are already outside that urban growth boundary. But that immediately calls to action 2 or 3 different government agencies, if not more, and multiple scales of government from city to county to regional and or state. And so how to coordinate that and what's the right balance of encouraging folks to live in areas that have reduced risk while also acknowledging that many people live in areas with disproportionate risk already is a really tough but really important question.
Yeah, getting that collaboration toward that objective. Wow, challenging.
Yeah,
Eric.
and I think I'm not as expert in this area as you are, Tyler, but I think just sort of taking a step back, it feels to me like there's definitely going to be some equity boom and bust going forward. We're going to see examples, and I think this is because several of us throughout the day have been talking about how essential it is for coordination, multiple organizations and people to be involved in the solution space. And I think we're going to see some examples where that doesn't happen and disadvantaged people in a community continue to suffer. And we're going to see examples in communities that I hope, and I'm very optimistic about this, are enabled by better government policies like the ones that I talked about today, where we make it a little bit easier for people to work together. The work together happens, builds a sense of community. People realize, hey, we can achieve these high levels of performance in our houses and through retrofits and new construction, et cetera. And we can achieve great things that way together as a community. And, we've got so many investments at the Department of Energy that are focused on this community challenge, because I think we recognize that we can't do this without community engagement. So we have to focus our efforts on encouraging that community engagement, but we can't make it happen. We can only encourage it.
Agreed. Really great thoughts. And we'll go to our next question. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think our early audience who asked the question forgot to introduce herself, but I think it's important to point out that's Cassie, and also Carol's there from Freddie Mac. The reason I want to point out that is, for today's discussion in the morning, we talk about the optimism innovation, right? We'll try to talk about how we can reduce the cost. Affordability is 2 sides. One side is cost, the other side is affordability, income. When we talk a lot about on the cost side, like how we can bend the curve, building code, innovation, et cetera, a lot. On the other side, on the income side, that's pretty beyond this room's discussion, like we kind of fix income. But there are still ways, I think many of the panelists has touched on the incentives, right? Income is a bigger society issue, but the incentives is something that we can all work on together. So I guess my question is like, many of you mentioned about the different program from HUD, from DOE. Then many of you mentioned about the developer side for the development, try to accelerate the permit process, try to reduce the development phase. There's many examples. In the end, I think it's a matter of collaboration. In the end, I don't think one party can afford all of those. So I think that's another piece of innovation can be considered by the audience here today, right? The decision makers. How we can be innovative to give the, how we pay for that. The cost is there when we reduce the cost, how we can pay for that. So my question for our panel today, like, for example, Eric, you mentioned that, you guys try through the Building American program, try to do like reduce the 50% the energy cost without any increasing any construction cost. That's amazing, right? But also in the private sector, there's a program like a PACE, right? The property assessed clean energy is very, very innovative. There's many other potential private sector programs. Also, Tyler, you mentioned, for the modern construction, there's, try to be flexible, providing the upfront liquid, try to make things happen. I think there's a lot of opportunity to make that happen. Again, I think the cost or the decision makers, how they overcome the cost is very important. So my question is, if you guys can elaborate, what's the potential beyond your own program? What's the potential that you see to collaborate with the large industry, with lenders, insurers, real estate appraisers, researchers? What's the opportunities you see there?
Great question from our speaker. So
Yeah.
I think this ties back to what Rob was saying. Every delay increases the cost. And so to the extent that we can find the lending mechanisms, the other cost saving mechanisms to decrease those delays, permitting or otherwise. So any thoughts that jump to mind with this question?
Well, I think it's a really important question because, it forces us to think about what are the total costs of any endeavor, right? And the costs of the materials and the equipment often are much less than half of the total costs. That all of those soft costs about putting it all together and doing bureaucratic processes like permitting and things like that, those add up. And so some of the solutions to cost compression, that's the term what we use to sort of figure out, well, what are all the different costs that stack up to be the average cost of something today? And then we analyze those things and we look at, how can we compress the costs of the biggest slices of that stack of costs? When we think about R&D, about cost reduction for efficiency, we think about in the factory, how can we improve the hard costs associated with producing a more efficient device. But it sort of ignores part of the process of change management where you have to figure out, and this is where I get to my biggest buzzword these days, is the learning curve costs. And that's how much does it cost for an organization to learn how to change from one, innovation, from one standard practice to one that includes a new innovation. And that learning curve cost, unfortunately, is something that people see. They see, okay, if I'm going to change that to this new material, I'm going to I'm going to double my costs or whatever. I'm making this stuff up. But the idea is that they perceive the cost of change as being disproportionately large because it looks scary, and they're intuitively adding risk to that stack of costs. And if we can figure out how to help people manage the change process in a way that they're collecting data on how much does it cost to do each of these different steps, just simple things like builders. This is what gives me optimism. Builders who don't measure how much does it cost them to repair the defects from construction over the years. If they don't measure that, then they have no idea that they're actually taking on risk by not upgrading their product. What we found is those who participate in our voluntary programs above code, they are the likely candidates for actually measuring what it costs to do that and how can we reduce that, and how can we learn how to manage the change process more efficiently such that that perceived learning curve cost is lower and hopefully squished to, it becomes a matter of course. Because if you look at a lot of other industries larger than the construction industry, you'll see that large industries like the automobile industry or whatever, they've systematized the process of measuring every change they want to make, measuring every outcome, adding it all up, and then optimizing economically what's the process that'll keep us competitive over time. And that becomes, things like Six Sigma, quality management,
Right,
things like that.
right.
That becomes part of the way they think about their product. Most builders don't do that.
Yeah,
So how can we help them to learn how to use principles that have been used in other industries? So that's where I focus a lot of my attention, because it's a big enemy for change to think about the unknowns of the cost curve.
yeah. I think that's a great point. More case studies again, on those leaders. Go ahead.
I think even beyond more case studies collectively, I will say I personally have benefited from our fragmentary industry in that in wanting to learn who can do what better. It's really helpful when all the project team members dislike each other. And so I talked to one of them and they're like, oh, here's the 7 things that architects could have done better. And suddenly I have a whole research report, which is really helpful. But without it being a research report or a university-led capital R research project, I think it would be really great if we even built in a basic project debrief on a project team after occupancy for the full project team to check in and even create a 1 or 2 pager on what could have been done better. Not only on a project level is that incredibly useful insight for folks researching policy or market actions to take, but for themselves, I don't think there is always that internal check-in for their own continuous improvement, where that I'm glad you brought up that example. It's like we can't improve what we don't measure. We can't knowingly improve what we don't measure. And a lot of this industry rests on sort of blind confidence. But when I see a pro forma that has a built-in line item for inevitable litigation costs as part of the development, penciling out math, that's something that's broken, where that's the default assumption is, oh, of course, there's going to be litigation afterwards. I could probably do a research project just on exploring the litigative findings of construction projects. And that would be as useful as talking to the folks actually doing the work themselves. And so beyond it just being case studies published or amplified by our center or similar or government case studies, I think building a case study approach towards every project we do is the minimal amount of effort to continuously improve your own business and how you work across projects.
Feedback loops, after action reflection.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, we've got another question from the floor.
Sure. Just we're talking about the overall cost, whatever we're looking at things. So we talked about downsizing the actual physical unit, right? But also a large expense in the process is where we build them, the unit, the land. And that's such a high percent of the cost, and it keeps increasing by zoning and upscale zoning. It's 2 acres to put a house on, so on. So a big part of it is a much higher density approach. And I think it all fits in together, but I'm curious because Tyler, both you and Eric, who I can't see behind the thing, but you're talking a lot about different reductions, but we're talking around a little bit about the actual sites. And I'm wondering how that builds into both of your thoughts.
Yeah, the omission was not intentional. I was just trying desperately to not be talking at you for too long. Yeah, site availability and the difficulties of acquisition for any developer, nonprofit, market rate, or otherwise is obviously a huge problem. I actually wish we kept Rob on the line a little bit longer to relate that to the reduction in single family housing construction, because in some capacity, moving towards density, which is by default smaller, more energy efficient and affordable units, like maybe we should want to be building less single family homes to the absolute ire of the American dream. And I've never had him online long enough to ask him how he thinks about land availability on that conversation about density and sprawling development as it relates to single family versus multifamily construction. But I'm at least glad he emphasized the sort of blurring the lines generally between capital S single family and multifamily, with townhomes or dense single family being an absolutely wonderful low effort, low tech approach towards the natural affordability and more natural density that are still with plenty of access to high employment opportunities and amenities of metropolitan cores, just building slightly more dense than we do. And so I don't have specific numbers to cite on that, but it's a core part of the conversation that I don't intend to ignore. It's just trying to combine like 19 different tentacles of this
Right,
conversation.
yeah.
Right.
But I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, and I'll say that with regards to, let me just use the Zero Energy Ready Homes program and the Energy Star Homes program as well, where we work together with those tax credits. Just by nature of the way they work, we've now got a tool that we haven't had in the past, where that actually encourages denser, organically, it encourages denser production. It's a tangential incentive, but I think I mentioned this in my talk before, that the $5,000 tax credit for Zero Energy Ready, for instance, means more as an incentive to a manufactured house or a multifamily unit, which is a lower per square foot, you know, but it's the same monetary amount. So a 6,000 square foot single family house gets that $5,000 tax credit, and the builder, you know, doesn't think real hard about whether or not they want to go more efficient. But for a multifamily unit that can actually achieve $5,000 tax credit per unit, if they build to a higher standard, they're going to look real hard at that higher standard. So there's hope for me that we're going to help in that more intelligent, more thoughtful, more efficient development process. And, you know, I think the good news is when you read the market information, you see our trends are in that way anyway. Multifamily is increasing. The manufacturers that I've dealt with on the manufactured housing space are targeting an increased market share, and they want to steal some of that for the single family segment. So whether or not they're successful, we'll see. But you know,
Great. Eric, thank you. And I think we'll take one last question right here
Thank
from their
you.
floor.
Hi, everyone. Renee Yancey with the American Institute of Architects. Got my eyes on you discussing architects in the ways that they have been discussed. But I want to mention a couple of things. Risk and protection of health, safety, and welfare, that we don't lose sight of that in the equation. Incentives, financial incentives for additional community engagement. We know those are expensive endeavors. Thank you for mentioning that, Eric. And the community's own aspirations for the types of homes they have, the types of buildings in their community. And I also want to point everyone to a couple of resources on the AIA website: the Equitable Development Framework, the Framework for Design Excellence, the Materials Pledge. These are all excellent resources that can be tapped into, in addition, of course, to post-occupancy studies that occur after the building is built. So thank you for the provocative conversation. And again, I've got my eyes on you. All in jest. Thank you.
We love our architects. We love our architects.
At the American Institute of Architects.
No,
Thank you.
that's great. And quality and occupant comfort is critical. And we'll have some comments on that in a second. We have a Zoom call as well, a question.
This is for Eric. Eric, can you describe a little more the work of the Building America teams and where folks can find more info?
we are just about to announce the Building America retrofit solutions teams sometime this week. I think it's in the approval queue right now with our communications office. And then more information will be available once we make that announcement. As I touched on briefly, those Building America teams the announcement of their selection will be this week, but the projects themselves in the specific communities and what technologies they're going to be exploring will be developed over the coming months. So it'll be a little while. We'll want to just keep an eye on the Building America website, where we'll post that information, et cetera. Hopefully that's, unfortunately, I don't have all the answers yet, but we'll get that information out as it becomes available.
Great. And we're going to wrap up in a sec, but 30 seconds on most optimistic, most innovative thing that you want to leave the audience with, Tyler.
It's awkward because my most optimistic take is also my most pessimistic take, which is that these are human problems that we're trying to address. So we're the ones responsible, and how we collaborate or don't with each other is the fundamental mechanism of making affordability and innovation writ large work or not work. So whether or not you're inspired or depressed by that is up to you. I think I'm more inspired by it than depressed. Which
The
is why I'm
power
still
is in
doing
us.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, it's and I've mentioned this already today several times, but the fact that we have what I call a policy tailwind going on with the incentives, unprecedented amounts that we see to support programs that I've been working on for over 25 years without any federal incentives. And that sort of acknowledges the pessimistic side of the problem, which is these are so hard that we've only been able to get something like 10% of the market to volunteer to go to that level. We need more. We need more incentives, et cetera. And now we've got them. Now we just have to make the most of those incentives. So
Yeah.
I'm hugely optimistic about a tipping point being where we are right now with the confluence of incentive-based policies and just better technology that's demonstrated.
It's great. Well, we have a sense of urgency. We have solutions. We have an idea of what the systemic issues are. So now we just need to put it to action. And